Hello, and welcome to the Sculpt Fitness Academy Balancing Women's Hormones class with Dr. Carmen Jones, who is the naturopathic doctor here in the Sculpt Fitness Academy. She's going to be introducing all of the foundations of seed cycling. I'm so excited for you to get as much value as you can from this class, especially if you're looking for a natural way to balance your hormones without synthetic hormone replacement, and a natural way to take care of your hormones today and your hormone future for tomorrow. I've seen so many women have their lives changed from this class alone, including my body transformation client, Jamie, who came to us just to shred 15 pounds, but she was struggling with debilitating PMS pains every month, and she was down for an entire day. And it was shown that she had an ovarian cyst with her doctor. And after a year of seed cycling, she went back to her doctor, had the x-rays done, and there was no more cyst to be found. And she is pain-free as long as she keeps with the seed cycling. So this is more of an everyday way to balance and support your body throughout life. And I'm so excited for you to learn all about the foundations of seed cycling today with Dr. Carmen Jones. Welcome on, Dr. Carmen Jones.
Woo! Thank you. It's great to see everybody. I'm excited to be here and share you guys a little information about our hormones. What does that mean? How they can become out of balance, and what we can do to support them to get our hormones back in balance. I love working with women to balance their hormones and the endocrine system, and I'm going to kind of go into that as we go along. But a little bit about me. I'm a licensed naturopathic doctor. I work with folks to address the root cause of their illnesses, of their concerns, of their diagnoses if they have one, or even just a set of symptoms. We work on supporting the body to be in a healing and repairing state. And so we all know, right, that our unique and amazing design, we already have all of the information to be in a healing and repairing state. It's in our DNA. It's within the cells of our body. That's how we were created. And so it's exciting to be able to work with women to help them understand how we can support the production of the appropriate amount of hormones, how we can support the metabolism or the breakdown of our hormones to have a better quality of life so we may be able to show up in the way that we want to. So we may be able to show up the way that we want in our relationships, our family, our communities, right? Even our jobs. And we talk, having our hormones out of a balance is a very significant shift. And a lot of times, especially in this country, we don't talk about it. Historically, we haven't talked about women's hormones, and we are all under the impression, right, like that we know that we get our period every month. And when our periods are painful, if they're intense, if they're really heavy, or if we're getting more than one period a month, and we're just taught that we just have to deal with it, right? We're not really ever given any solutions or understanding on how to support our hormones so that we don't experience those drastic symptoms every month, right? I tell folks all of the time, our periods aren't supposed to be painful, right? We shouldn't be taking time off of work or off of school, or not being able to do our daily functions because our period pain or because of the symptoms or PMS, right, like really knocks us back. Those are signals that our body is trying to tell us that something is out of balance and we need more support. And so I'm excited to kind of share some of that with you guys to help you understand how to balance our hormones. I got a lot of fantastic questions ahead of time to kind of make sure we hit on a lot of different pieces, because when we talk about hormones, right, a lot of people automatically think our estrogen and our testosterone. And those are significant hormones, but we also have our progesterone, and that kind of our progesterone, our testosterone, our estrogens, kind of balance out sort of our sex hormones. But we also have our stress hormone, cortisol. We also have our thyroid hormone. And then we do have a piece that's even like our insulin, right, is considered a hormone. And so all of those hormones are connected. And so as we age and as we go through different life cycles, right, our hormones are still important, an important prominent factor in when we're menstruating, when we're pregnant and postpartum. And then if we can balance our hormones before we hit perimenopause and menopause, it makes that change so much smoother, right? Usually the folks who have the most significant shifts in their symptoms, or sorry, the most significant symptoms in perimenopause and menopause is usually because we didn't have the opportunity to balance our hormones earlier in life. So here's an opportunity, yeah, that we can just like to begin to address these things. So, all right. I'm letting folks in as they come in. So I want to start off with understanding our cycles, right? And so I'm a visual learner, so I like to share pictures. So I asked if I could share screen. So hopefully you guys can see some of these pictures. And I'm going to tie it all together here. But I want to start off so we're all on the same page. And maybe you already know this information, which is fantastic, but just to make sure that we're all like kind of, at the same level. This graphic is not my graphic, but I love it. I share it all of the time. Um, oh, and this top half of the graph, this is what we call the ovarian cycle because this is what's happening with our eggs. All right, these are eggs and these developing follicles. And then down here, in the second half of the graphic, it's our menstrual cycle. So we have an ovarian cycle with what's happening with our eggs. Then we have a menstrual cycle, which is what's happening with the lining of our uterus, right? And that's what sloughs off every month. So, um, so they stack them on top of each other so you can see the changes throughout the cycle. So technically, day one of our cycle is when bleeding starts. Okay, so you'll see it on the right hand side of this bottom graphic is day one when bleeding starts. Then that shifts over to the left hand side. So if day one is when bleeding starts, the first 2 weeks in like a traditionally 28, 30-day cycle, our estrogen is the biggest player. And the estrogen is what's in the yellow. So you'll see it's the biggest player that first 2 weeks. The progesterone is the green layer here. It's still present, but it's not the biggest player. Okay. So what's happening down here in the uterus is that as our estrogen climbs up and comes to a peak, estrogen stimulates the growth of tissue. Okay. So our uterine lining has sloughed off, right? And our estrogen starts to rise. It promotes that lining to get thicker. It's growing tissue, right? And then as that it peaks around ovulation, what's happening up here with the ovaries is that each ovary, right, is surrounded by a follicle. And each month, for folks who are ovulating, one follicle will start to develop, right? And so as our estrogen climbs, it's also stimulating the growth of tissue around that egg, the follicle. And then it acts on these hormones. LH is luteinizing hormone, and FSH is follicular stimulating hormone. So it's stimulating the follicle. This is why they call this the follicular phase, because of the follicle is growing. And as the follicle matures and we get this spike, it releases an egg, right? That egg is what we call ovulation. Usually it's midway, so it's usually around anywhere from day 12 to 15. We can actually track this if we tracked our basal body temperature. Sometimes we actually see a raise in temperature. It's usually like anywhere from a half degree to a degree in our body temperature when we first wake up in the morning, and that usually like tells us things are changing. So then that egg is released, right? That egg is released, and the if it's fertilized, it's looking to implant in the uterine lining, right? So then this is the key, is that this estrogen, it peaked, but it has to decline, right? We have to have this valley. And that's what stimulates our progesterone to then show up and start rising. This valley right here in their estrogen is primarily dictated by the liver. So the liver is supposed to metabolize or break down excess hormones. So it's easier and more efficient for the body to break down or metabolize our hormones and recycle them than it is to make our hormones from scratch. And so when we talk about the liver support, when we talk about like the cruciferous vegetables, those cabbage, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, and we're using them to help to support the liver, this is the part where we're trying to influence so that we can get this valley with estrogen, right? Because that promotes this hill of progesterone. Well, when this progesterone starts to rise, what progesterone does is it stabilizes the blood vessels in the uterine lining, right? So estrogen increases the growth or the thickening of that uterine lining, but progesterone stabilizes it so that it doesn't, so that we don't start bleeding early, so that the lining of the uterus is ready for that implantation if this egg gets fertilized, right? So this is important to note because if our cycles are less than 28 or 30 days, we look at progesterone, right? Progesterone is supposed to match this second hill that estrogen creates. And so if it doesn't match this second hill, so if our progesterone doesn't, it's a protective factor. So if it doesn't match this hill, or if our estrogen stays elevated, it doesn't have this valley, then we can see shorter windows of our menstrual cycle where we're, bleeding every 21 days or less. Or sometimes I have women who come to me who are bleeding multiple times a month, right? If you're getting multiple periods a month, then we need to work on supporting that progesterone to stabilize those blood vessels so that we aren't getting our periods so often. Does that make sense? Um, I forgot to mention if you guys have questions to throw them in the chat. Um, I know I saw a chat button here somewhere. So if you've got questions or you want me to clarify anything, throw that in the chat for me so that I can see it. And I will make sure and touch base on all of those. Okay. So the quadrant that I want to make sure that we touch base on is the luteal phase. Because a lot of times we hear about the follicular and the luteal phase, because a lot happens in the luteal phase because of this progesterone and estrogen match. Now, once that egg is released in ovulation, that follicle turns into something that's called the corpus luteum. Okay. And this, if it's fertilized and it becomes implanted, instead of our body producing progesterone, this is actually what starts producing progesterone. And so that is very significant, especially when we're going to talk about kind of postpartum situations, because this is what makes those what we call super physiologic amounts of our estrogen and our progesterone. And so our progesterone is, like I said, it's not just protective against, or not against, but protective with estrogens. But this is also what prevents things like autoimmune conditions, right? Like Hashimoto's or lupus. This is what prevents baby blues or like postpartum depression. It's the progesterone that's the biggest player in that. And so when we see it change, and we can see this change in perimenopause as well. It changes a little bit differently, but it's still the change. And if our body's not making enough progesterone, that's when we start to see these significant changes in our symptoms. So I wanted just to give like a baseline so we understand what's happening when we talk about our hormones. And because estrogen and progesterone are the biggest players around like this cyclic hormone balance, these are the ones we're trying to support in seed cycling. So that's why I really wanted to make sure I introduce them, and so you can kind of see what their roles are. Yeah. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, excellent. Um, So let's see. Um, Let me introduce seed cycling in case we are not familiar with seed cycling. So it's going to follow the same pattern, it's just going to look different. All right, so I want us to pay attention to the first 2 weeks, which is this follicular phase. This is from day 1 to about 14, 15. And then the second half, this is our luteal phase, right? This is from ovulation to when our bleeding occurs. All right. So the first phase, our estrogen's the biggest player. The second phase, our progesterone is more of a significant player. Okay. So then if we translate this into seed cycling, what seed cycling is you're using seeds to support the production of these hormones. Right. That's all it is. But because those things run cyclically, when we alternate the availability of those seeds in our diet, um, we can support that. Yes. So the cycle, so day 1 is the beginning of seed cycling. So, um, so our estrogen seeds, okay, is our estrogen seeds are, sorry, pumpkin, chia, and flax. Okay. Our progesterone seeds are sesame and sunflower. Okay. So if we look at those a little bit differently and we look at them down here, um, traditionally, seed cycling has been done or has been kind of determined by our moon phases because as women before electricity and before sleeping indoors, a lot of us, our cycles were uh, influenced by the moon cycles, right? We know that moon cycles influence the oceans. We know are the tides. We know that moon cycles influence life cycles of different organisms, and it also influences our hormone cycles as human beings. So, but I don't want you to get confused by where it says new moon and full moon. Because traditionally, a lot of women, if you start paying attention, what I'd like for you to do is start paying attention to your cycles and start tracking them, and then go back and look in the calendar and see if your cycle naturally falls on a new moon or a full moon cycle. And if it doesn't, that's okay. But sometimes it's interesting to kind of see how our body kind of naturally balances out. I also use this for women who don't have periods or don't have regular periods, like women who might be experiencing PCOS, or even like perimenopause, where our periods are starting to like become erratic. So then I start looking at, well, let's try to get them back into the cycles of the moon. So, so these new moon and full moon are not set in stone. They could be flip-flopped for you. If you notice that you are actually bleeding around the full moon, then you can kind of move that accordingly. But this top half of the circle is the first 2 weeks. This is our follicular phase, okay? This is our estrogen phase. So we would be looking at supporting it with flax seeds, chia seeds, and pumpkin seeds. We're usually looking to aiming to look for about 2 tablespoons of those seeds. We prefer ground seeds because flax and chia actually absorb a little bit better if they're ground. Um, Now, these are also going to be better if you grind them before you eat them. So, I wouldn't buy ground flax seeds already at the store. If it's already ground, it's fantastic for the fiber content, but we want the flax seeds for the omega 3s because our estrogen and our progesterone, they're hormones, which require a fatty acid backbone, right? And the fatty acids that are the most are the easiest accessible to build those hormones on are the ones that we find in chia seeds, flax seeds, and pumpkin seeds. Now, so flax seeds are going to be better if you grind them up as you go. Usually, we're only grinding a few days worth because the same thing if you buy them ground, when they get exposed to oxygen, they oxidize very quickly. And so when they oxidize, you lose those good fats in those flax seeds. And that's why we prefer just to grind up like maybe 4 tablespoons at a time. This 2 tablespoons of ground seeds can be a combination of, or just one of. So if you wanted to do like a chia pudding today, and say you started with chia seeds and you ran out of chia seeds and you wanted to add flax, or if you had pumpkin seeds, you want to sprinkle them on your salad or put them in your smoothie, we could do that as well. So it's not 2 tablespoons of each one, it's 2 tablespoons of either one of them or a combination every day for that 2 weeks approximately in the follicular phase. All right. So I have a question that asks, let's see, I put them in my morning protein, I grind them in the blender, but I do it every day. Should I add them at the times listed? I've used them for the other benefits. So if I understand you, Debbie, you're asking, is it okay to have the flax, chia, and pumpkin seeds all month long instead of just in the first 2 weeks versus the second 2 weeks? Yes. Okay. So, um, it's not that they're bad per se. You can still incorporate them because as we saw in the cycle, we still have estrogen in the second half of the cycle, right? So it's not like our estrogen just disappears. So it can still be beneficial all month long. I would just make sure to encourage that you're also doing the progesterone seeds all month long, or at least the second half of the cycle. So those progesterone seeds are things like the sunflower seeds and the sesame seeds. Hopefully that makes sense. Now, the sunflower seeds, you're welcome. The sunflower seeds and the sesame seeds, this one it's different if you have an irregular cycle versus a regular, like on the dot cycle. So if our cycle's a little bit irregular, so say maybe we skip a month or maybe it's going like 40, like over 30 days, 35 days, 40 days, 50 days even, or we haven't had a cycle in a few months. This is where we would follow the irregular cycle, and we would actually be aiming for 3 tablespoons of our sunflower seeds and or sesame seeds. Okay. I didn't mention the fish oil component, but that's also a fatty acid that we need for the backbone of our hormones. For the progesterone, if it's a regular cycle, we're looking at 3 tablespoons. If it's a regular cycle, like it's pretty consistent with that, at least 28 to 33 days, 2 tablespoons will be sufficient of our sunflower seeds and sesame seeds. Let's see, is a blender enough in a smoothie, or do we need to grind them in a special way? No, a blender should be fine. Yeah, a blender should be fine. And it is a great way to be able to get these seeds in. So, all right.
Can
So,
I ask a clarifying question really quickly? Sorry.
yeah.
So when you use whole flax seeds, put them in the blender with your other smoothie ingredients, and that's going to blend the specific flax seeds enough to get all the benefits. Or do they need to be blended by themselves?
So I would put the flax seeds in first. So it kind of depends on your blender. Like if you have a high-speed blender, like a Vitamix or a Ninja, put the flax seeds in first, then put a little bit of your liquid in it and blend it really well by itself. Then add the rest of your smoothie ingredients.
Okay, cool. So get those seeds blended real good. Awesome. Thank you.
You are very welcome. Um, Perfect. So then hopefully this kind of makes sense that why we're splitting up like kind of 2 week cycles and then 2 weeks. So it's always going to start here is your day one of when your period starts, right? So day one, and then mark it on your calendar, and yeah, feel free to see where the moon phases fall as well. But our day one, we're always starting with our estrogen promoting seeds. And then after, yeah, about 15 days, we say 14 to 16, we're looking to support the progesterone promoting seeds, which is our sunflower and sesame seeds. So, I did have a question about what if we're allergic to sesame seeds or we're sensitive and we can't take sesame seeds. That's okay. We don't have to, don't start eating seeds. If you know that you have a sensitivity or an allergy to any of these seeds, don't start incorporating those seeds, right? Because that's going to create more inflammation. And that's another fire we have to put out. Just focus on the sunflower seeds. I'm also going to share with you some foods that promote progesterone and foods that promote estrogen. And again, it's not that you can only eat these foods or do these seeds at certain times of the month, but oftentimes the more symptoms that we experience, right? So let me go back and answer that question or give you a different perspective on that question. So say you're doing the pumpkin seeds, the chia and the flax seeds every day in your smoothie. But say that same person who does that is experiencing pretty intense PMS symptoms. So things like cysts, fibroids, things like fibrocystic breasts or really breast tenderness. Say this is perfect migraines. Say that person also has pretty intense cramping or pain where they have to like reach for a Midol or ibuprofen or a heating pad. Or that same person has really intense periods where they're going through a significant amount of pads or tampons, or they're having to empty their cup faster, or they're leaking through their clothes. That is a sign of estrogen dominance. And so that particular person, I would encourage them not to do those seeds all month long. And just to, focus on having them the first half and really try to take that break in the second half of the cycle. Yeah. So it's a different perspective, right, on the same question, but this is why we all experience things differently. So you can kind of see, or hopefully see where we can kind of support things individually if people are experiencing those types of symptoms. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. I have a question. Perfect. Yes, I want you to try this, Miss Mariah. I want you to try this around your hormonal migraines. And what if your period is short? So what if it's less than that, 28, 30 days, right? So if we go back up here, and I'm not sure where we came in, but if our period is shorter than that 28 days, that's usually, now, usually, the most common cause is because our progesterone is not, being produced in adequate amounts. Usually it's not being produced enough to match our estrogens. So we really want to focus on our progesterone promoting seeds. Okay. So for folks, if your period is regularly short, it's regularly less than 28 days, or again, we're having two periods in a month, I would encourage you could do these seeds, sunflower seeds and sesame seeds, all month long. You don't have to just wait for that second 2 weeks because we're trying to prolong things. With the irregular cycle, it being short of that 28 days, I would also focus on 3 tablespoons of these seeds versus 2 tablespoons. Um, for our sunflower seeds, if we I do prefer raw sunflower seeds, but if all you can find are roasted and salted, they will do. When they roast seeds, the same thing for pumpkin seeds. When they roast them, they raise the temperature, and so that can actually change some of the beneficial fats that are in there. So we prefer when it comes to seeds that they are raw if we can get them. Now, they do make a sun butter now, which is a sunflower seed butter. It's not usually raw sunflower seeds, but it is a good way to like get people to get their sunflower seeds in. So it kind of becomes a little bit of a happy compromise that I have people look for. For the sesame seeds, it's usually like tahini, is a ground up sesame seeds that you makes a fantastic like different dressings or sauces. They use tahini and hummus. So there's different ways we can kind of get those things in. And then we still use a fish oil as a backbone, as another omega-3. But for the progesterone, we focus on a couple of different, and these are usually in supplement form, but EPO stands for evening primrose oil, and BO stands for borage oil. So especially if we have a sensitivity to sesame seeds, we really want to make sure that we are getting those, these are different fatty acids for the backbone of progesterone that we're supplementing with either evening primrose oil or borage oil. Um, yes, I think I can. Yes, I will share this. Yes, I will share this with you guys. And, Bree will make it happen. Okay, so I want to share this is the summary. It's the same thing. I just put it in words. Some of our brains are a little bit, yeah, different at processing things. So I just broke it down a little bit differently. So the summary is day 1 through 14. Day 1's the first day of menstruation. Our emphasis is estrogen, so we're looking at flax, pumpkin, and chia seeds. Usually it's about 2 tablespoons a day, and then a good fish oil or omega-3. Now, if we don't, if you don't eat plant or if you don't eat animal proteins, and or fish oil doesn't sit well with you, we could use flaxseed oil. We could use uh, more foods that are higher in omega-3s. So things like walnuts, we could use um, walnut oil or avocado oil if we needed to. And this is the EPA, the backbone, that fatty acid backbone that I've been talking about, that helps your body build the estrogen hormone onto. And then the second half of the cycle is the either 3 or 2 tablespoons of our sunflower or sesame seeds. And then down here it's written out. Huh? No, it's not. Just kidding. On the first page of this handout, which you will get, I just didn't put it in this presentation, you'll get the gamma-linoleic acids, which is that evening primrose and that borage oil. So it will have those words written out for you, so it's easier for you to find. Okay, so we have those options. All right. Does that make sense? Hopefully. Okay.
Follow-up question about ladies who have periods that are too short. You want them to eat in the luteal phase the whole month in order to support higher progesterone production. How long should they be eating in that style? Is it just until their period reaches that 28, 30 day mark, or should they like stop after like 2 or 3 months if it like how long should they keep with that cycle?
Usually it's 3 months. So usually we're doing things for in 3 month cycles to help balance out our hormones. So usually I have people keep that up for 3 months. Especially if people have shorter like or irregular cycles. I'm going to come back to that. I want you to, here we go, focus on these progesterone promoting foods. So that's why you're also going to get this handout. So these progesterone promoting nutrients, things that are high in vitamin C, vitamin B6, zinc, magnesium, and selenium. These are foods that we would also be focusing on to regulate our periods. Again, if they're shorter than that 28 days, or if we're like sensitive to the sesame seeds. And I'm going to talk about I'm going to show you other situations where we would want to focus on progesterone promoting foods and those seeds. Okay. Um, so I wanted to share that. Now, from a different perspective, if we have things like PCOS, if we have things like Postpartum, we'd be looking at progesterone as well. If we're looking at things like perimenopause or menopause, we're looking at phytoestrogenic foods. Okay, because what happens in perimenopause and menopause is that we know that our estrogens naturally start to decline, right? Well, as our estrogens start to decline, that demand isn't as high, but if our hormones weren't already regulated, sometimes that estrogen just kind of falls off. And our body doesn't do very well when our hormones fall off a cliff. And so we see this in postpartum too. But what we can do is we can promote more balanced estrogen levels in the bloodstream by incorporating these phytoestrogenic foods. Sorry, my screen changed. So I wanted to list these for you as well. So we could see how we can support our hormones with our diet. So when I have women who are having concerns with, yeah, perimenopause, with menopause, and we're trying to rebalance that estrogen and progesterone, these are the things we're incorporating on just a regular, on a daily basis, if possible. Okay. Does that part make sense? All right. So, another scenario that we're really promoting these foods is again in postpartum. So when we're pregnant and we saw that corpus luteum, right? That if the egg is fertilized and it's implanted into the uterine lining, that corpus luteum starts making its own progesterone, it becomes the placenta, and it becomes a progesterone making factory. That's what stabilizes a pregnancy for that uh, fertilized egg to grow into a baby. And so when we are pregnant, our body has what we call super physiologic levels of progesterone and estrogen. They estimate that our estrogen and our progesterone is anywhere from 2 to 2.5 times more progesterone than we're used to, and at least twice the amount of estrogen we're used to. Well, and I mean, sometimes this is why people like sometimes women feel great when they're pregnant, because of these added hormones. Doesn't always happen to everybody, but after you deliver baby and we deliver that placenta, well, now your body, that's the is relying 100% on itself to make those hormones. And so our hormones just fall off of a cliff. And for a significant amount of women, it's harder for our hormones to bounce back after those super physiologic amounts that our body's been so used to for the last 9 months. And so this is where it's really important to look at seed cycling, to look at these foods that promote that balance, because we're really trying to nourish our body so that it can make up for this huge deficit after we deliver that placenta. This is often why we don't talk about this, or there may be some midwives that are a little bit better about sharing this information, but most obstetricians don't share this information or don't know this information, because this is what can mitigate, like I said, like baby blues, postpartum depression. We have a lot of women who are more prone to autoimmune conditions after pregnancy, and it's because their hormones fall off that cliff and our body can't make enough progesterone to kind of come back to meet the demands and the stress of labor and delivery and just like healing and repairing. And so when we have such lower levels of progesterone in postpartum, it makes it hard for us to like reduce our risk of autoimmune conditions like Hashimoto's or lupus or rheumatoid arthritis and things like that. So I wanted to make sure that we kind of also understood that relationship.
Quick question while you're on this topic. So, say a woman has a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old, can their hormones postpartum still be influenced by that? Or does your body typically kind of just like regulate itself out? Like, how long after having a baby can you still have these imbalances from pregnancy?
So that is a great question. Um, that's a great question. No. So I have women who have been struggling with things and it was not ever identified as a hormone imbalance. And their kids are 24 26. They're, yeah, in their 20s, and they've been struggling with this for so long, and nobody's identified it. Um, and no, because I think it's because nobody talks about it. We don't let women know that that struggle, because it becomes a little bit of a silent struggle, is not normal, right? Or that there's something different that they could be doing. My number one telltale sign is um, sleep, especially around progesterone, is sleep. And it's when people tell me I've never slept well since I had my baby, right? It doesn't matter if that baby's 5, 10, if that baby's 3 months old, or if that baby's 30 years old. That's usually a telltale sign, is that if I haven't slept well since I had my baby, it's because their progesterone levels were never able to come back up. Yeah. And so you like, I don't know. It's a huge discrepancy in the conventional world around understanding and teaching women about their hormones, especially around postpartum. Yeah. And I think it's a little bit challenging for moms because I mean, you're juggling a lot of things, right? You're juggling to keep your little one healthy. And oftentimes it's one of those where like we kind of suffer in silence because we didn't know that this wasn't normal, right? I mean, we all hear about postpartum, we all hear about baby blues. That doesn't always, and sometimes women don't recognize it because you're in the middle of it, right? Like we like, oh, it's because I haven't gotten any sleep. It's because of the stress. It's yeah. And so we don't always recognize it until after the fact and after things have changed. Then they're like, oh, that's what that was. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing on that. Would you say that like all women after you've had a baby should seed cycle? How soon should they start that? And like, do we just sync up with the moon if they don't have their period back yet postpartum?
Yes. So all moms who've delivered, I always encourage them to start seed cycling. One, those seeds are also really high in proteins, right, which our body needs in the healing and repairing process. But it will definitely help to support the rebound production of hormones that our body needs. Yeah. And when we look at these phytoestrogenic foods, so these foods naturally have a little bit of estrogen in them. That's why they call it phytoestrogenic. The molecule looks a lot like our body's estrogen, but it's a little bit different because it comes from plants. So when we start incorporating these foods, it can be very helpful to bridge that gap, right? So that our body can start coming out of that cliff or out of that valley to start making those hormones appropriately. Yeah. No, cycling is a fantastic tool for women postpartum as well. All right, excellent. So, um, okay, I want to show you this real quick because I want us to get a better understanding. So that's kind of seed cycling in a nutshell, but I want to share this um, to get us a better understanding, yes, of our hormones. Let's see, would that support breastfeeding as well? Yes, seed cycling will support breastfeeding. Yes. It gives us those healthy fats, those healthy proteins that our body needs to make breast milk, but it also supports again, our progesterone and our oxytocin work well together so that we can keep our supply up in breastfeeding. So, okay, I wanted,
Along with those galacticons,
yes,
those galacticog foods and that mother's milk tea. We'll have to do another class, probably just for all about pregnancy and moms. But yeah, there's a lot of hope for if your breast milk production is wonky through nutrition. Is that right, Dr. Carmen?
that's exactly right. Yes. Yeah. Fantastic. Yes, we could do another class focusing on those things. So I wanted to get a little bit of a deeper understanding because when we talk about our hormones and that estrogen and that progesterone relationship, it's not an island, right? We are not the sum of our parts. All of these things play together. So I wanted to teach us a little bit about how we actually produce our hormones. So we make cholesterol. right? That's that fatty acid backbone. And then pieces of our cholesterol, when we talk about that seed cycling, they're the ones that help with these cofactors, which is where these arrows, well, it's actually this one for our estrogen and then this one for our progesterone. But our body makes cholesterol, and then it goes to this hormone called pregnenolone. And from here it forks, okay? It can fork to this hormone called DHEA, which feeds the sex hormone arm, which is this lower arm here. So it goes to this one called androstenedione. Estrone is the form of estrogen that our body produces the most in pregnancy. Then it goes to testosterone, right? We're all familiar with that. And then it goes to our estrogen, okay? If there is a change in this enzyme, whether it's genetics or not, if there's a change in this enzyme where our body takes testosterone and goes to estrogen, and it's sluggish or it's slow, then our body's testosterone will build up and go to DHT. And this is where the androgens come in. This is what we see in PCOS. Okay. And so when we balance PCOS, it's a little bit different. Seed cycling will still help because you're still acting on progesterone and estrogen, but sometimes we have to block this conversion of testosterone to DHT. All right. It's not always that we need to reduce our testosterone, but it's the conversion to these androgens. And this is the androgens is what creates the in PCOS, the hirsutism or the hair growth, right? Like on our chin or on our body where we don't expect to see hair growth. Our acne, right? This is what creates like prolonged periods, or irregular cycles. This is what creates this DHT influences our insulin, the insulin hormone. So that's what can like move us into like a metabolic sluggish metabolism or a metabolic syndrome that can come with PCOS. And so it's a little bit different when we're talking about seed cycling. I want to just kind of tag this on and help get us a better understanding that it's actually this conversion that we want to slow down, and promote your body's natural testosterone to go to the estradiol. So those estrogen supporting seeds, our flax, our chia, and our pumpkin, can help promote the testosterone to go to estrogens instead of going to androgens and become an excess picture. Okay. This excess picture, the same thing when we talked about increasing, when we talked about here, this valley is dictated by our liver, and how well our liver's functioning, because that's what breaks down. Every time we get a valley, those are hormones being metabolized or broken down. The liver is responsible for that, right? So if we want our testosterone to not get in excess to not get converted to DHT, we have to work on our liver support here. So those are things like the cruciferous vegetables, our cabbage, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, kale, bok choy, right? Chinese cabbage, all of those in the cabbage family are fantastic for preventing the conversion to these excess androgens that we often see in PCOS, right? And then the same thing, those same cruciferous vegetables will help us to reduce those estrogens. So if we have symptoms like estrogen dominance, which shows up as pretty intense PMS symptoms, heavy bleeding, fibrocystic breast, fibroids, ovarian cysts, even thyroid dysfunction, hypothyroid, or hyper, all of those, yeah, are kind of dictated by the liver. And so that's why we start incorporating those uh, cruciferous vegetables. Okay. Now, if we go back to our cholesterol, go back to this hormone called pregnenolone, and we follow the second fork. The second fork is our progesterone. Okay, we talked a lot about progesterone. Well, progesterone also can fork. If we have plenty of progesterone available, it will feed the sex hormone pathway. Okay, but its priority is cortisol. These two are made in the adrenals, and cortisol is our stress hormone. So the more stress that we experience, and it doesn't matter if it's an emotional stress, like things that we worry about, things that we think about over and over again, or if it's a physical stressor, right? Like an injury, a chronic illness, something going on physically in our body, cortisol will always get priority, okay? Because it's the survival hormone. And so our body's trying to keep us alive. So if the demand for cortisol is high, for whatever reason, progesterone automatically gets allocated to cortisol first. All right. So if progesterone gets allocated to cortisol first, that means there's less available to feed the sex hormones. Okay. That also means if our cortisol demand is high because of a lot of stress, then progesterone is not always available to match our estrogen in the second half of the cycle. Okay. This is one of the number one reasons why I see this not matching up is because the demand for cortisol is high, especially in this luteal phase. And so if you've ever done the deep dive into why sometimes it's hard to work out in the luteal phase, why sometimes fasting is a little bit more challenging in the luteal phase, it's because our body's already trying to manage the stress on just like a regular day-to-day basis. And so if our stress is um if our cortisol demand is high and our body is prioritizing, I lost the word, sorry, prioritizing cortisol, that stress hormone, then sometimes we do not have enough progesterone or we are not producing it fast enough to match this half of the cycle. And so that can also be another reason why we see shorter cycles, bleeding more often, right? We can see this as like usually it shows up as like breast tenderness when our progesterone is low. We can see things like wearing a shirt or a bra is very uncomfortable. We can see this as swelling in our joints. So I have some people that they have trouble going to bed with their rings on because they wake up in the morning and they can't get their rings off because they swell so much. That's a progesterone deficiency. Sometimes it shows up as like joint pain. So people may think, gosh, am I getting arthritis? But we're only in like 20s, 30s, and 40s. We shouldn't be getting arthritis. It's often a lack of progesterone. So we can see, right, how that can translate into symptoms when that hormone is out of balance, due to the high demand, from stress. Yeah.
Popcorn question here. So, when it comes to weight loss with my PCOS girlies, and it sounds like this may be applicable to women who have shorter periods or that lower progesterone, that like, and I often get pushback for this. If they like to run or do those really intense HIIT classes or workouts, I have them shift from running to walking, or just doing gentle weightlifting. Is that something that you agree? Is that like a strategy you agree with? Do you think that's probably best to support their hormones? I always say you don't want that extra stressor from running or extreme intense HIIT workouts because your body's already really stressed out. Is that correct?
Yes, that's a perfect example of those situations. And sometimes it's relearning that because we've often been taught, right? Oh, well, the more calories I burn, right, the more fat I'm going to lose or the faster I'm going to lose it. But it's not, right? We know it's not just calories in, calories out. It's how you support your body. Well, if your body already has higher of a demand in that luteal phase, we've got to listen to that, right? Because this is what happens is that oftentimes people will ignore that component and they will do the HIIT workouts, or I have folks who will like really push, running or training for marathons or CrossFit, and they're actually creating more stress, which is increasing this demand for cortisol. So again, you're always prioritizing progesterone to your stress hormone and not to your sex hormones. So then you're perpetuating that imbalance. right? When if we slow down and we work with the body and with that luteal phase, that's when, right, you'll see more significant weight changes when you're doing more like nourishing exercises, right? Like walking, stretching, right? Like even swimming, things that are still movement, but the intensity is not adding another layer of stress on the body.
Got it. Cool. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Okay. Um, let me, those are the things that I wanted to make sure and I shared with you guys today. Um, let me double check that I got most of our questions answered. If you guys have questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. Um, okay. So, I'm just going to reiterate some of these things to make sure, yeah, that we're all on the same page. So when we talk about seed cycling, it's has the opportunity to do two things, right? Is that it can be preventative for balancing our hormones so that like later in life when we are into like perimenopause and menopause that those things are smoother. They can also be corrective if we have irregular periods. Hopefully we have a better understanding of the role of the liver when it comes to balancing our hormones and supporting that excess testosterone or androgens, as well as our excess estrogens. That's going to be our biggest bang for our buck is supporting our liver, right? Um, in balancing those hormones. Now, we I like to do that through food, and because those cabbage family foods or those cruciferous vegetables give you the biggest bang for your buck, I'm always supporting those first. So we can see a balance of like an estrogen dominance, which is where your body's not clearing that estrogen or your body's not making or producing enough progesterone to match that estrogen. We can see that correlation with Hashimoto's or thyroid imbalances pretty often. We can also see the relationship between if we have a higher demand for cortisol or higher stress levels that aren't managed to also promote that thyroid imbalance, right? These are all hormones, and they, again, they're not islands, right? They're not produced independently of one another. And so thyroid often gets the short end of the stick. When we see other hormone imbalances, usually we see thyroid as well. So correcting a thyroid imbalance is we're not to I'm from a whole person holistic perspective and like a root cause perspective, thyroid isn't the only thing that we're looking at. Right? We're looking at all of these other hormones involved as well. So then when we talked about those hormones again falling off that cliff in postpartum, that progesterone is going to support those thyroid levels as well. Um, let's see. Oh, okay. So I didn't get a chance to answer these questions, but I want to, if you guys got a few more minutes, if you'll hang with me. Um, we asked about hormone replacement therapy, managing like menopause type symptoms without synthetic hormones, and yes. So I'm gonna always have people take the opportunity to reassess or self-evaluate where your hormones are before menopause if you have the opportunity, right? When we already move into menopause, our body's still shifting. And sometimes doctors will mistakenly tell women, oh, you don't have it, your body's not making estrogen anymore. You don't have any more hormones. Or if we've had a hysterectomy for whatever reason, where, our a total hysterectomy where uterus and ovaries have been removed for whatever reason, doctors will tell people, "Oh, you don't have any hormones. You're just without hormones," which is not true. Please don't let them don't believe that, okay? Even for women who have had a total hysterectomy, your body is still producing hormones. We produce hormones in our fat. As women, we produce hormones in our adrenals. We produce hormones in our breast tissue, in our fat tissue. So your body's still making estrogen and progesterone, even testosterone, even if you didn't have a uterus or ovaries. Okay, that's probably one of the biggest myths that they tell people because they're like, oh, we're going to take these out and you can just go on hormone replacement. Well, that's really not that helpful. Okay, so say we're in menopause, we have our uterus, we have our ovaries. We can still optimize the amount of hormone that our body needs even later in life, right? And so again, it's promoting that progesterone and that estrogen. It's balancing those cortisol demands. That's what's going to help to kind of move out of like menopause with symptoms and move into a more kind of balanced state, right? I think perimenopause and menopause are getting a lot more publicity, I guess, or a lot more media these days. Because people have never really talked about it before. But it's still, even though our body needs less estrogen as we get older, we still want to optimize what we make. Right. So that phytoestrogenic foods are fantastic, but we can still use seed cycling in perimenopause and menopause as well. That's why I love it so much. It's one of those things that's like, it's simple, but it has the opportunity to create such an impact with women in balancing our hormones, and it's yeah through food. So that's why I really emphasize that. Now, as far as hormone replacement goes, they usually like there's bioidentical hormones. They're usually replacing either like estrogen, progesterone, or testosterone. And I tell folks those are tools that we can use. Those hormones are not meant to be taken long term. Sometimes I have women who had like a hysterectomy in her 30s, and here she is 60 years old, and she's been on hormone replacement for the last 30 years. That's not supposed to happen. To be honest, it's not beneficial for our body, so we have to be a little bit careful. Bioidentical hormones, they don't always tell women the side effects of that. The research does show us it does increase our risk for hormone-driven cancers like ovarian cancer, uterine cancer, and breast cancer. So we do have to be careful with that. Because it can be more hormones than our body needs, right? That's a little bit of the balance is are we making enough hormones to match what our body needs now? So if we look at things to support menopause symptoms without pharmaceutical hormone replacement, we can definitely do that with food. If we need things, so because progesterone, right, was upstream from our estrogen and our testosterone. So if you remember the steroid pathway that I just shared, is that when we look at supporting our progesterone levels in perimenopause or menopause, we can often influence those testosterone and those estrogen levels as well. So because progesterone is a little bit safer, I often recommend people start looking again at those progesterone promoting foods. If we're looking to try something more specific, say we've tried the foods, we're doing those, but like say our menopause symptoms are pretty intense. We've got hot flashes, we're waking up soaked in the middle of the night. Say we're having, right, like 20, I'm going to give you a range, okay? Because some women like to experience hot flashes once in a while, and some women are having hot flashes like 50 times a day, right? Like it's just a little bit unbearable. We're noticing changes in our memory. We're noticing changes in our weight and our body composition, right? Then we might look at adding something like a wild yam cream. Sweet potatoes and yams have those phytoestrogenic. They were listed in the phytoestrogenic foods, which you guys will see in your handouts. So incorporating those in your diet are so important. But we can also do that as a cream. It's also getting a little bit popular on social media to support um, menopause, because the goal is not just to replace your hormones, it's to figure out why your body's not producing those hormones in the adequate amounts that it needs, right? It doesn't matter what age we are, where we are in our life cycle. That's always the goal, is to optimize, right? Like how much hormones our body is supposed to be producing, and if we're not producing it, why? Yeah. So, um, okay. Hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully you guys learned something new. I appreciate your time tonight. I will, yeah, make sure. Hopefully I hit all of the questions in the chat. Let me know if I missed any. And thank you.
I have one question about teas that support our cycle. I recently drank a really strong like dandelion tea, and my period came like a week early. And now my cycle starts at the beginning of the month versus the middle of the month, and it's still that way. So, any tips like for like when should we do a liver detox tea, or are there other teas we should be drinking throughout the month?
Um, That great question. So, yes, dandelion is fantastic for the liver. But again, it will stimulate the liver to detox faster, right? So when we saw, right, like your hormones are getting broken down or metabolized or detoxing the second half of the cycle, if you're doing more detox type teas, dandelion, artichoke, um, I forgot the other one, milk thistle, then you're promoting your body to clear those hormones faster as well. So usually those types of detoxes we're doing in the follicular phase or in the first 2 weeks if we can. Um, there are some herbs that are fantastic for supporting the cycle all month long. Things like raspberry leaf is fantastic for supporting the cycle all month long. It helps to like maintain that uterus lining. If people, you can also partner it with that progesterone deficiency. If we're seeing right shorter periods or that like really tender breasts, right, swelling, arthritis type symptoms, usually a progesterone deficiency, we can partner that with raspberry leaf tea, and that does wonders with helping to, yeah, stabilize that progesterone. So that's a fantastic one. That is great. I am also very partial to Vitex or to chaste berry, because it's a hormone modulator. And so if your hormones are out of balance, if they're elevated, it'll bring it back down. If your hormones are low, they will bring them back up to where your body wants them to be. And so I like to look for teas that also have that chasteberry in them. You can actually do chasteberry all month long, but sometimes it's helpful in that second half of the cycle, specifically because, again, you're trying to modulate those levels so that they are appropriate instead of being over or having an excess of one hormone, like the estrogen versus the progesterone.
Cool. And if testosterone is high, when should we do like a spearmint tea?
Oh, perfect. So that needs to be all month long. So if we're trying to address androgens and excess testosterone, spearmint tea should be all month long. And also the cabbage family foods should be all month long. Yeah. Yeah.
What about raw carrots? I'm hearing a lot about that online.
So raw carrots are like naturally high in vitamin E, and vitamin A, and so those are technically fat soluble vitamins. All our hormones are fat driven hormones, and so they can be very beneficial in the building of those hormones, like the production of those hormones. But they're also carrots are also naturally antioxidants. So they help to reduce like oxidative stress. They help to reduce like our risk for cancers. So you can see that relationship with like juicing carrots or eating raw carrots, and like lowering our risk for hormone driven cancers. You can see that.
Or like for reducing excess estrogen specifically.
Yes, yeah. So most hormone-driven cancers are because of excess estrogen. I'm sorry. I didn't make that connection. But yes. That's yeah, a lot of integrative or natural approaches to things like breast cancer or like ovarian and uterine cancer because they're hormone driven, which means it's because of excess estrogen. We're have carrot juice, and technically apple juice, fresh juiced apples, green apples, and fresh juiced carrots in that regimen because of the protective components. Yes.
Got it. So if these hormonal imbalances aren't like if it starts with like PMS cramps, things like that, it can be an early signal of if it gets worse, then that's where you find cancers. Is that what I'm understanding correctly? Or
Um,
is that correct?
Yes, you're more prone because like I said, when we should have pain-free periods, right? We shouldn't be having PMS symptoms that are severe, like a week, leading up. Sometimes people have a severe, ovulation symptoms or like the week leading up to their period, like they know their period's coming because like their mood changes are like a roller coaster, right? Like the pain, the intensity, or when they're bleeding, they're, like feel like they're hemorrhaging or they're just heavy for them. All of those are signs that or symptoms that our estrogen is elevated, and we're not clearing that estrogen. Well, anytime we have a hormone where we have higher levels than our body's used to, our body will create more receptors on our tissue to accommodate that excess hormone, right? Because it's a feast or famine. Your body's like, oh, we're feasting. We have all of this estrogen. Well, we want to use it, right? Your body wants to be efficient, so it's going to use it. So it starts adding estrogen receptors on the tissue to take that estrogen out of the bloodstream and actually use it. Well, if we remember earlier, estrogen promotes tissue growth, right? That's why it's so important in that follicular phase in the first 2 weeks. Well, if you have a lot of estrogen receptors all throughout the body, right, and we have high levels of estrogen, it's constantly promoting tissue growth. That's where cancer comes from. So that's why the earlier we recognize the symptoms, the earlier we actually address it, or we understand that we can address it, the better off we'll be in the long run, right? You're significantly reducing your risk for those things in the long run, especially if we have a family history, right? If we have moms, aunts, grandmothers, sisters who've had some type of hormone-driven cancer, that doesn't have to be our story. Right? We can change that, but we have to, I think, one, know that we can change that, and two, have the guidance to be able to balance those things.
Thank you so much. Yes, make sure to go see our breast health and preventative breast cancer talk that we have recorded for more on that. And yeah, that's all of my questions. Do you have any last things to say, Dr. Carmen?
Um, no, I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you guys for joining in. I will share the handouts so you guys have it available. If you ever have questions, don't hesitate to reach out. I hope this makes sense. And yeah, good luck on everybody's journey.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.